With more than 100 years of experience between the four of them, covering Minnesota high school athletics, the Minnesota Sun newspaper's sports editors bring you Sun on Sports.
And welcome back to Sun on Sports. I'm Mike Shaughnessy, joined again by Nick Clark, Greg Kleven, and John Sherman. We're previewing Classic Lake Conference games in this segment, Nick, and Wayzata gets to get on the bus and take a little bit of a trip.
A little bit's a bit of an understatement, Mike. It's a 4-hour ride to where they're going. It's the middle of Wisconsin, where they're going to play Wisconsin Rapids in a game that they had to work awfully hard to find. We've talked a lot about the situation the Classic Lake schools are in, and the soon-to-be Lake Conference schools are in just a 5-team league, and how hard it is to fill out a football schedule. Well, this is kind of how you do it, and Wayzata is going to play Wisconsin Rapids Thursday, October 15th. It's not going to be an easy day. Fortunately, it's MEA weekend, so they're not in school that Thursday. There's no school interference, but they're hopping on a bus at noon. They got a little over a 4-hour ride out there to play a game. They hope to get there sometime, 4:30 or 5, somewhere in there. Enough time to get out, get in the cafeteria, get a quick bite to eat, and get on the field and stretch before playing a game. And then after the game, they get right back on the bus and come home. So we're talking, 3, 4 in the morning by the time they roll into town. X's and O's wise, I guess it's a game Wayzata is probably going to be heavily favored in. They're going to come in undefeated, the number 1 team in the state of Minnesota. Wisconsin Rapids was off to a 2-4 start through 6 games. Brad Anderson, Wayzata's head coach, said they were a good team, but that he didn't know much in terms of style of play and that sort of thing yet. He brought up an interesting point when it comes to tape exchange. Typically in Minnesota, the rules are, I don't know if it's even a written rule, but it's just kind of how it works, is you exchange with the team you're playing the previous 2 weeks in games. Whereas in Wisconsin, you're allowed to videotape your opposing team, something that you're not allowed to do in Minnesota. So Brad was still trying to work out and figure out how to figure out how they're going to exchange tape with the team. He thought it would be probably the basic way just to go kind of how Minnesota does it and swap out tapes, but we'll see. Nonetheless, it was a trip that they're not overly excited to make. It costs a lot of money to get out there, and looking ahead to next year already, and trying to fill out their schedule. It looks like they're going to play Eden Prairie twice, but they're searching for games. And he said they've looked in Washington State, they've looked in California, they've looked in Florida, and they're looking all over the country trying to fill out a schedule right now that, frankly, might not happen, and it might be a double up thing where they're going to play all 4 of their conference teams twice. And that's not a lot of fun for the kids, but that's the situation they're in.
It seems to me that might be where things are headed if the Lake Conference is indeed a 5-team league for the foreseeable future, because scheduling non-conference games is such a hassle that it seems like it, even though it's maybe not an ideal solution for a lot of the football coaches in that conference, but it might be easiest if some of those teams just played each other twice.
Yeah, and it looks like that's the way it might come down. However, I guess from our standpoint, you look at this and you look around the country at some of these high-power high school football programs in the nation. And we're talking Wayzata, Eden Prairie in Minnesota. That's about as high power as we get right now. You could throw Cretin into the mix as well. And it's neat to see those teams hop out of state and play some other nationally ranked teams and that sort of thing. The games end up on ESPN, and it's a big deal. But what people don't realize in Minnesota here is and it happens everywhere, I'm sure. But from Wayzata's standpoint, the money it takes to get your team out there and hop them all on an airplane and fly to California or Florida to play a football game is. It's a big dollar amount, and then again, if it involves an overnight stay, you need approval from the school board, and there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's a sticky situation. It's kind of neat from our aspect to get to talk about it, but I know it's one, Brad would rather just go play Minnetonka, I'm sure.
Greg, John, Minnetonka is making a similar trip to Wisconsin Rapids on the 16th, and Greg, Eden Prairie will be a member of the Classic Lake next year. Do the coaches that you deal with in that conference, would they be amenable to maybe playing schools within the new conference twice during the regular season, as opposed to having to go on the road for non-conference games, or have to really look under every rock to find a non-conference opponent?
All I can say is Eden Prairie football coach / athletic activities coordinator Mike Grant told me that a 5-school conference is unworkable, And as far as Eden Prairie is concerned, I don't think they're going to go for that at all. I don't know whether some of these schools end up play independent schedules. I think something's going to be worked out. They cannot have a 5-team conference. It just won't work out. The Classic Lake has proved that the last couple of years. So I think something's going to happen, and the State High School League is going to step forth, and they're going to assign a couple of teams to different conferences, and then I don't know where it's going to go from there. But that's what I hear.
It's funny, John. We got another game that night in the Classic Lake, Edina Armstrong. That's kind of a going away party for those two schools. It'll be the last time they play.
I'm excited about that game, Nick, because we've actually got two Classic Lake schools that aren't playing somebody from Wisconsin. I think sometimes accidents breed some of our best ideas. You know, Ben Franklin out with his kite and his key, getting hit by lightning, basically discovering electricity. Maybe we're onto something here with this Wisconsin series. How about this for a conference? The 4 Classic Lake members, Edina, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Wayzata, joined by Eden Prairie next year. Also joined by Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, and Menominee.
Well, then let's throw in Fargo North and Fargo South in that. That's perfect, right up the freeway.
Well, the only problem with this that I see is the Wisconsin teams are allowed to film the Minnesota teams. The Minnesota teams can't film the Wisconsin teams, and the North Dakota teams can only film their home games. So I think we're going to have to solve that problem. But getting back to our games, Edina is going to be playing Armstrong. This will be Armstrong's final game in the Classic Lake Conference.
No, Edina's too, technically.
Technically, Edina's also.
Yeah.
Edina will go on with its other opponents. But Armstrong is done. They're done playing the bigger schools that they've played in the past. And I think they'd love to go out with a win. Edina is a little bit vulnerable this year. They're down a quarterback. They're going to give Armstrong a good game. Armstrong's going to give them a good game. I look forward to a touchdown either way.
Yeah, Armstrong. We'll see if they give them a good game. They've been extremely inconsistent, and in the process of that inconsistency, they haven't won yet. They were real happy the way they played. Minnetonka was a homecoming loss, 35-20. The following week, I went and watched them play out at Orono, and Orono just handed them. It was 35-13 in the game that really wasn't even that close. So we'll see if we'll see which Armstrong team shows up. I imagine the last Classic Lake Conference game in school history, they'll be up for it, and it's a team that they might have in their heads believing that if we're going to win one, this is it. So why not?
Edina, of course, Nick, they need this game to get some momentum for the playoffs, maybe to improve their playoff seeding. I think Edina's going to come strong. Maybe it will play its best game of the season.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back in a minute with another segment, that one looking at the remaining games in our coverage area, including some Northwest Suburban Conference matchups.
Stay tuned for more Sun on Sports, your insider's guide to Minnesota high school athletics. For the scores and more, tune in daily to mnsun.com/sports. And tune in every Saturday morning to Sun on Sports on AM 950, the voice of Minnesota.